The world urgently needs culture-changing stories about transgender people. More people say they have seen a ghost than know a transgender person. When you don't know people, it's easy to demonize them. Our community has achieved so much, and yet we are still being victimized and villainized with cruel and harmful lies.
Although the title of this hearing implies a much-needed discussion, we're likely going to be forced to listen to transphobic bigotry. According to the Human Rights Campaign, in just the first 143 days of 2023, elected officials across the nation introduced more than 520 anti-LGBTQIA bills in state legislatures. 23 states banned trans youth from participating in school sports consistent with their gender identity, with some laws focusing on kids as young as kindergarten.
Trans people in the United States doesn't even exceed 1% of our population, and yet there is so many resources and energy and time dedicated to figuring out how we can more finely exclude them.
As we all know, transgenderism has quickly burst onto the national scene as one of the most contentious issues of our time. As you just heard AOC say, transgender individuals make up less than 1% of the U.S. population. And yet, she laments, so much time and resources and energy are devoted to excluding them. Well, I disagree that such individuals are being excluded, quite the contrary, actually. But I actually do agree with at least half of what AOC said. It is true that trans individuals make up less than 1% of the population. So indeed, why is it that so much time and resources and energy are devoted to this issue? Why are school curriculums and laws and sports teams and speech codes being remade in order to push this upon the American people? The transgender movement, in my mind, started out as a well-intentioned effort to make people who are different feel more comfortable. But now it is turned into a largely sick and proselytizing religion that is abusing and confusing young people. And even worse than this happening is that there are hordes of people who gaslight us that this abuse is not happening and call us transphobes if we acknowledge it. So today, we're going to dive into the facts on transgenderism. I have done a lot of research on this. We're going to be discussing what is queer theory? When did it become popular? How many Americans are actually transgender? And what is really happening in our schools and in our laws? I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hey everyone, and welcome to Timeless and the Julie Hartman YouTube channel in general. Today is the day where I decided that I would want to be canceled on YouTube, have my video be pulled from the algorithm. The issues that I decide to profile, sometimes I really wonder if it's necessarily smart to do so. But hey, we have got to talk about these things because this issue, especially transgenderism, is only becoming more and more central in our national discussion. Thank you so much for being with me. You can also catch Dennis and Julie on this channel, my show with Dennis Prager, every Monday. And then Timeless is Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So yes, we are talking about transgenderism today because I really don't like seeing young people, and not just young people, people of all ages, being abused and manipulated in the name of having compassion being thrown on them. And that is exactly what is happening now. As I said, I think this movement started out as something that was well-intentioned and really has morphed into largely something that I think is evil. And again, it is manipulating, using, and abusing the minds of young people. So today we're going to look at the data here of what has been going on over the past few decades. When did this movement change from something that was, I think, largely good into something that is now largely evil? We're going to look at how many people are actually trans, and then I'm going to go through what's going on in schools and what's going on in laws. And let me tell you, I am giving the abridged version of this. I mean, I had to cut out so many things for the sake of time. I could easily do 2 to 3 more shows on this subject, just giving data of all of the things that have happened. But trust me, you will get a pretty comprehensive sense of what is going on, because we are being gaslit that this issue is not as prevalent as it really is. So let's dive in here. But before we do so, I just want to quickly establish, lest I be called a transphobe. I already have been, so hey, whatever. Might as well continue talking about it. You're already going to be called a name. But lest I be called again a transphobe, I want to make some of my principles or some elements of my worldview really clear. The first is, contrary to popular opinion, I do not hate trans people. I view everyone as corny as it sounds, created in the image and likeness of God. I have had transgender friends. I have enormous respect and sympathy for individuals who experience gender dysphoria. I remember I think it was about 2015, when now Caitlyn Jenner, then Bruce Jenner, came out as transgender. It's kind of a rhyme. And I remember that then Bruce, he went on Diane Sawyer's program on ABC News and talked about how for his whole life, he felt like he was living in a foreign body, that it was so hard for him to just be seen as this epitome of masculinity because he was, this Olympic athlete. It was so hard for him because inside he felt like a woman. And I remember they put up the famous photo of him after he won the gold medal and his hands are in the air. And it's this triumphant moment that all Americans looked at as kind of a symbol of the greatness of the United States, the greatness of human potential. And Bruce said he looks at that photo and it's so painful for him because inside he felt like he was so different. I remember watching that interview in my parents' living room and crying and feeling so much sympathy and compassion, how difficult it must be to feel like a foreigner in your own body. I have enormous understanding of that. I also hold true that when you are an adult, you can do whatever you want with your body. You can change your name. You can change your pronouns. If you want to, change your genitals, you can go and do that. That is part of living in the United States of America. And although I may disapprove of that in some cases, or I may think that that is not the right course of action that one person should pursue, I would never tell someone not to do it because, again, it is a free country. But what I said, the phrase that I added in there is very important. When you are an adult, this should not be forced upon children. Children should not be made to make these decisions. Just as in many states it is a felony to give a minor a tattoo, it should be a felony to have minors get gender transition surgeries before they are old enough, their brain is fully formed enough to make that informed consent. And the final thing I will say as far as my principles is that although I understand that there are people who identify differently outside of the norm of male and female, that does not change the fundamental biological reality that there are only 2 genders, male and female. So 2 things can be true. Individuals can identify however they want. It's a free country. They can feel however they want, but that doesn't change a biological reality. So with those principles set, we'll still be called a transphobe, I'm sure. Let's go on here and first look at the data. How many people are really trans? Well, as you just heard AOC say, and as I said, I agreed in a shocking moment with her, at least half of what she said, about 1% of the population is trans. According to the UCLA Williams Institute, and by the way, I'm going to link a lot of my data in the description box so that you can look at it yourself. And so I can defend myself against charges that I am lying or making things up. It's very important for us to back up our claims. So I'll put this in the description, as I said. So according to the UCLA Williams Institute, about 1% of the population is trans. That's about 1.6 million people. So the UCLA Williams Institute says that 1.3 million adults identify as trans, and about 300,000 of those 1.6 million are youth, people who are younger than the age of 18. And interestingly, they have data on how transgender identification varies from state to state. And as one might assume or presume, those in blue states tend to identify at higher rates as trans than those in red states. So 3% of New York youth aged 13 to 17 identify as trans, and that number compares to 0.2% in Missouri and 0.6% in Wyoming. Just to add in some more data, a June 2022 Pew study held that 1.6 of the United States population is transgender or non-binary, and they said that those numbers are higher for younger people. So they say about 5% of young adults in the United States say that their gender is different from their sex assigned at birth. So the general population, 1% identify as trans, but young people, 5% according to Pew. This is also backed up by the UCLA Williams Institute. They say that actually it's much higher than 5% of youth identifying as trans. They say that, quote, nearly 1 in 5 people who identify as transgender are ages 13 to 17. Well, that's important to note. It's not that 20% of that population age 13 to 17 is trans. It's that of the population that identifies as trans, 20% of them are 13 to 17. So, going on again, U.S. Census Bureau Household Pulse Survey also holds that about 1.03% of the U.S. population identifies as trans. They say that it's about 2.6 million people. So you get the idea. It's a small number. Now, interestingly, there are people who identify as trans, but identifying is different from actually pulling the trigger, if you will, and getting surgeries to change your body and really in your physical reality affirm your feeling and your mental reality. So according to the Journal of the American Medical Association, the number of people who have had gender affirming surgeries, and that's, genital reconstructive surgeries, chest and facial procedures and other surgeries, that number is about 48,000 patients between the years of 2016 to 2019. So the data indicates that far more people are identifying as trans or non-binary, but fewer and fewer of those people are actually getting the surgeries, as I said, to really go forth with it and revolutionize their body. Now, according to JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association, out of those 48,000 patients from 2016 to 2019 who got those surgeries, over 7% of them, that's 3,600 people roughly, are aged 12 to 18 years old. It's a lot of young people who are getting these surgeries. And it is also the case, we see here, that with regard to youth, the number of trans identifying youth has doubled over the past 5 years. This is according to the UCLA Williams Institute. Abigail Shrier, who is a big writer on transgender issues, she wrote a book called Irreversible Damage, has argued that transgenderism, those who identify as trans, has increased by 1,000% over the last decade. So we know it's a small number of the population, but it seems to be concentrated among youth. We know that people who are identifying as trans are not necessarily always going ahead and getting surgeries, but that the number of trans individuals, and specifically the number of young people who are identifying, has increased many times over the past few years. So what fascinates me, and this again could be so many shows, but this show today is really kind of intended to give some broad brushstrokes, to arm you with facts so that you can go out in your everyday life. And if people are telling you, certain things or making certain claims, you have the evidence. So this is just a kind of a broad picture. But it's fascinating to consider, how did this proliferate? And the answer that my research goes back to is social media. We're going to look right now at a Google feature, which is really great. I've profiled it on my show before. It's called Ngrams, and it tracks the amount that a word has been used in books over a certain time period. So you can put in, as I did here, the year 1800 to 2019. They don't have it up to 2024. They stop at 2019, but you can look at that. You can type in the word love and see on the chart how many times that word was used in books in that time period. So let's look at the word transgender on the Ngram from 1800 to 2019. So unsurprisingly, not used at all, not used at all, not used at all, starts to pick up in the mid 90s and then really goes up in the 2000s. And the year when it shot up the most is 2012. Let's look at another word. Let's look at non-binary from 1800 to 2019. Again, not used, a little bit used in the 1920s, 1940s, and 1960s, picks up in the 1960s, which, by the way, makes sense because I first learned the term non-binary in my 9th grade computer science class about numbers. So that term is, used in a numbers way, but you see on that graph that, like the word transgender, it shot up in the 2000s, came down, actually, unlike the word transgender a little bit, but then shot up hugely again in the year 2012. Okay, let's go to a third term, gender nonconforming. Nothing, and then shot up in the year 2012. Well, what happened in the year 2012? Instagram happened in the year 2012. And a lot of data indicates that the way that young people especially are learning about these concepts, transgenderism, non-binaryisms, gender nonconformingisms, is from social media. Quoting here from Abigail Shrier, again, the author of Irreversible Damage, she said that 65% of adolescent girls discovered the concept of transgenderism after they had prolonged time on social media apps. She also found, and this is apparently very unpopular and un-PC to say, but the truth doesn't care about popularity or PC-ness. The truth is the truth. Abigail Shrier also holds, and this is, I think, related to social media, that girls especially are more likely to identify as trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming if they A, feel peer pressure or peer popularity for doing so, or B, if they know someone in their friend group who has done the same. Quoting from Abigail Shrier, quote, over 60% of parents of transgender children said that the announcement of their child's transgenderism brought their child a popularity boost. She also says, quote, nearly 70% of teenagers belong to a peer group in which that identify as trans, but who didn't show signs of gender dysphoria growing up. That's who she's referring to. So allow me to start from the beginning. Quote, nearly 70% of the teenagers belonged to a peer group in which at least one friend had also come out as transgender. In some groups, the majority of the friends had done so. Recently, the Brown University newspaper, the Daily Herald, I believe it's called, came out with a study that nearly 40% of Brown undergraduates in 2023 identified as LGBTQ. And that was up by double or triple the number that it was a decade before. And one of the things that I said, which apparently is so horrible and contentious and not PC, is that, well, what does that indicate? That indicates that a large part of this is social contagion. That doesn't negate the fact that, of course, there are people who are truly gay or who truly have gender dysphoria, obviously, but just as, there are certain, social fads, like a color of a car becomes popular, that doesn't negate the fact that some people genuinely love the color red for their car and would buy that car anyway. But it shows that it's catching on as a social contagion. And that to me is not a mean or bigoted thing to say. And the evidence, if it's shooting up, especially among younger people, when the numbers are doubling or tripling from what they were before, of course, it seems like a lot of this has to do with social contagion that is facilitated by and amplified and exacerbated by social media, as we see with that 2012 data point. There was an article recently in December of 2023 in the Wall Street Journal written by a Dr. Roy Eappen. He's a Canadian doctor. And he argued, apropos of the title of this article, that most transgender kids turn out to be gay. So he cited a study in 2021 that profiled boys who decided to identify as girls. So trans people, boy to girl. And this 2021 study found that among these boys, 2/3 who said that they were trans ended up being gay. And Dr. Eappen writes, quote, "This makes sense. Gay kids often don't conform to traditional sex roles." And so he said that right now, the kind of in vogue craze, if you will, is transgenderism. And so these kids that are confused and who are actually gay are being made to believe, because adults are telling them, that they may be trans. And apparently this is actually a acknowledged phenomenon in the United Kingdom, that medical clinicians are using a slang term to describe this phenomenon, and they are calling it, quote, "transing the gay away," which is a play on praying the gay away, which in this country and in the Western world was common decades ago, that people would pray to or seek church counsel to help their own homosexuality or their loved one's homosexuality go away. Interestingly, it's kind of a shift now where they're, as these clinicians are saying, they're transing the gay away. And many people are arguing, as we're going to get to in just a few moments in this episode, that a lot of the gender ideology that is being forced upon children, especially in schools, is a modern form of conversion therapy. Because you're taking people whose natural proclivities may be one way, and you are essentially bombarding them with information that their natural proclivities may be subverted to go the other way, just as it was done in the terrible conversion therapies that many gay individuals had to go through to get their gayness away. Okay, so again, we understand 1% of the population, concentrated among youth. Few people get the surgeries, but the number is growing up. It's doubling and tripling, especially among young people, the prevalence of identifying as trans. It's very prevalent, especially in young girls who are transitioning to become boys. And social media and peer pressure or social contagion seem to be contributing to this prevalence. Spark Notes summary of what I was just talking about. Now let's look at queer theory, which, like critical race theory and like the kind of intellectual progenitors of DEI, started in the latter half of the 20th century. So I'm profiling right now a really great article written by Christopher Rufo, who's a journalist who actually exposed the whole Claudine Gay plagiarism scandal. And he wrote this article in the Epoch Times, one of my favorite newspapers, which I, shameless brag, have also written for, editorials for. And it's called Inside the Transgender Empire. And he really shows you the way that this all started. And so Christopher Rufo writes this. I'm going to quote him. Forgive me, I don't always like reading from articles, but this is so good, so concise, and so well written. I'm going to read. So here's what he says. In the late 1980s, a group of academics, Judith Butler, Gail Rubin, Sandy Stone, and Susan Stryker, established the disciplines of queer theory and transgender studies. These academics believed gender to be a social construct used to oppress racial and sexual minorities, and they denounced the traditional categories of man and woman as a false binary that was conceived to support the system of heteronormativity, i.e., the white male heterosexual power structure. Before we continue, I want to tell you about My Pillow. I use a lot of My Pillow products, including the My Slippers, the My Pillow, of course, and the My Towels. And you can get a lot of these products at a discount if you use the promo code Hartman or call 1-800-566-6745. Now, My Pillow is known for its pillows, but they didn't stop at the pillow. They also created the Giza Dream bed sheets, which look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep, which is crucial for our overall health and especially helpful when you're someone like me who struggles with sleeping. Mike found the world's best cotton called Giza. It's ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. Mike's Giza sheets come with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. They come in a variety of sizes and colors, and the deal is the sale of the year. For a limited time, you'll get 50% off of the Giza Dream sheets. You'll get a set for as low as $29.98. That's $29.98 if you go to mypillow.com and click on the radio podcast square and use the promo code Hartman. There you will get not only this great offer, but also deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow 2.0 mattress topper, MyPillow kitchen towel sets, and even flannel sheets, and so much more. Call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman, or go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Hartman. So what Christopher Rufo is reporting on, looking at the writings of these queer study individuals from the 1980s, is that from its inception, transgenderism, he says, has been a political movement. That it has been about, again, disrupting or dismantling the apparatus of heteronormativity and traditional gender roles that these individuals view as oppressing others in the United States. Mr. Rufo continues, Susan Stryker, a male-to-female transgender professor currently at the University of Arizona, described his work, he's one of the queer theory progenitors of the 1980s, described his work as, quote, a secular sermon that unabashedly advocates embracing a disruptive and refigurative genderqueer or transgender power as a spiritual resource for social and economic transformation. So for people who are perhaps listening or reading Mr. Rufo's article and go, this is so horrible for, Julie or Christopher Rufo to be saying that transgenderism is a political movement, these individuals are admitting it. They're not hiding it. They're coming out and saying unabashedly that this is a political movement. This is about fundamentally transforming these structures in American society. Now, let me pause. Does that mean that every single individual who is trans or who is what they call, an ally of the LGBTQ trans community is doing it for political reasons or to transform the power structures in the United States? No. I believe that a lot of everyday people are thinking that they're doing the compassionate thing. And as I said, the way the movement started, I think, maybe not from the top, from the people who were kind of coming up with these theories, but from among the population, it started as something where people just wanted others to feel comfortable. And so I don't think that every single individual in the country, especially young people, are supporting, the pronoun movement, for instance, because they view it as this greater apparatus to transform American society. But that is its origins, according to Christopher Rufo. And I think a lot of people, in fact, are pushing this transgender movement in order to transform American society. But what's really important to understand here is that these queer theory individuals are open about this. They are writing that this is a political, social movement. Continuing with Christopher Rufo, I promise we're almost done with the reading, but it's so good. It's so important to know. Quote, in Mr. Stryker's best-known essay, he contends that the transsexual body is a technological construction that represents a war against Western society. I am a transsexual and therefore I am a monster, Mr. Stryker writes. And this monster, he continues, is destined to channel, quote, its rage and revenge against the, quote, naturalized heterosexual order and against, quote, traditional family values, end quote, from Christopher Rufo. Christopher Rufo also profiles another main intellectual of queer theory coming from the 1980s, Rosa Lee, who wrote a collection of essays called Transgender Marxism. And she, reading from Christopher Rufo, quote, argues that trans people can serve as the new vanguard of the proletariat, promising to abolish heteronormativity in the same way that orthodox Marxism promised to abolish capitalism. And Rosa Lee writes this. If you want to read some of what she said, it's quoted in Christopher Rufo's Epoch Times article, or of course you can look it up on Google. But she talks about how the transition to communism in our lifetime, it used to be about class. The mechanism of communizing our society used to be about class, or done through class. But now she's saying it can be done through transgender individuals or people who are identifying outside of the norm of heteronormativity. And she says that this is a way to, quote, transition to new communist selves, new ways of being and relating to one another. Spencer Klavan, who is a great friend of this show, he appears monthly in our Thinker of the Month series. He, in his book, How to Save the West, actually writes about this kind of cultural Marxism, where he also says that, again, this idea of the idea of the Marxists and of the communists was to fundamentally transform society and to tear down what they viewed as the systems of oppression. And the way that that would happen was through class. The proletariat, i.e. the working class, would rebel against the bourgeoisie and seize the means of productions and create a allegedly egalitarian, equal, communist heaven. And what Spencer Klavan is saying is that right now in the United States of America, what we're seeing is that transgenderism and race is kind of the new working class, if you will. Because what Marx said is that all your arguments that you make are class arguments, that whatever political positions you take, you have this insidious desire, if you're in the bourgeoisie, to oppress the proletariat and make money for yourself. And we see that language being echoed in the political discourse that we have now, where, for instance, during the Black Lives Matter movement, people were saying that, all of your actions and your arguments are based on race, that you may think that you're anti-racist, but really in everything that you think or do, if you call a Black person articulate, if you compliment a Black person's hair, that's reflective of your insidious, race-based worldview. When we have that now applied to gender, that people have an insidious heteronormative based worldview that they apply to everything. So again, these kind of ideas, the obsession with race, the obsession with transgenderism started out, again, I think, as something that was positive and something that was intended to help people, but now has been seized upon by people who want to use that as a cudgel to transform the United States of America. So now we're going to go into the most sobering part of the episode, which is what is really going on here in schools and in our laws. Over the past 2 to 3 years, I have been hoarding articles on this subject. I actually do this with a lot of subjects. I have all these folders that are color-coded, and I, call them China, the economy, the border, crime, elections, and I have one that is called Gender/Transgenderism. And so for the past 3 years, every article that I have seen that has to do with a way that a school curriculum or a district was changed, or the way a law was changed, I filed that into my folder. And what I'm about to talk about is the highlights, if you will, the most egregious examples of what I've compiled. I had to cut out so much of this episode. And just a funny anecdote, I was actually preparing this episode on a plane, I was flying from Florida to Los Angeles. And so I had my big yellow gender/trans folder, and I was taking out Christopher Rufo's article, and I was taking out this American Girl doll textbook, which we're going to look at. And the people sitting next to me were looking at me, and I was kind of afraid, honestly, because I thought, what if I'm near someone who's going to call me a transphobe? It's going to be a pretty hostile flight. But then I realized, no. I actually want people watching me sitting and combing through these articles, because I want people to know about what's really happening. And I want people to see that people think that this is crazy. And it's not something that we should have to hide if we're reading articles about the evil that is being propagated in the name of helping others be more comfortable with themselves. So here are the highlights. Let's start with the state of Illinois. Illinois' governor is a man named J.B. Pritzker. He is part of the larger Pritzker family. I believe his sister or his first cousin, I forget what the relation is, Penny Pritzker, is head of the aptly named Harvard Board of Overseers. And J.B. Pritzker's cousin is a trans woman named Jennifer Pritzker, who was born James Pritzker. They're massive family of the Hyatt hotel fortune. And he transitioned a few years ago, and he was called the first transgender billionaire. So the Pritzker family has, perhaps because of their family connection to the first trans billionaire, has allocated enormous amounts of resources and support to trans care, gender affirming surgeries, transforming curriculums in schools in order to teach people about the tenets of transgenderism and gender non-binaryism. And so in 2019, when Governor Pritzker first came into office as the governor of Illinois, he immediately signed a law into the state education program to have the Department of Education teach this gender ideology in their curriculum. Okay, so let me give you an example. And I know I've said it before, but you have no idea how expansive this is, how much editing I had to do. If you want me to do subsequent episodes where I just continue to give example after example after example, I will do it. This is so prevalent. So let's just look at literally one school district in Illinois. This is called the Evanston-Stokey School District. And they, in 2022, had school district 65. They had what's called a LGBTQ plus equity month, where they taught all of their students, and they changed it depending on the age, certain diktats about gender theory and transgenderism. So this is public information. I'm going to link it down below, and you can click on this school district's curriculum, and you can go through and you can click on preschool, you can click on first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and see the Google Docs of what they are teaching these students with regard to gender. Let me just give you the quick summary. Preschool students in this Illinois school district are taught about the pride flag, and they are taught the vocab of what the words gay, lesbian, non-binary, and queer mean. This is preschool. It's not even kindergarten. Now let's go on to kindergarten. Kindergarten is apparently when you are deemed old enough to be introduced to the concept of transgenderism. In first grade, these students are taught the pronouns ze, zer, and her. By second grade, they are expected to be able to discuss the difference between your sex assigned at birth and your gender identity. And according to this document, these second graders have to understand that it's one thing to have your sex assigned at birth, and that's assigned by a doctor. It's not your real body. It's what just a doctor assigned to you, but that your real gender identity is different from that assignment by your doctor. And then by eighth grade students have to be competent in understanding, quote, recent bills that aim to limit transgender athletes from participating in school sports, end quote, actions that they can take about these bills. Also, I could go on and on about the state of Illinois. They have several children's hospitals that are funded by the Pritzker family, which have some of the most robust gender affirming care programs in the country. By the way, I think that term, gender affirming care, when it's used especially for minors, is Orwellian. Gender affirming care for minors is gender denying child abuse. You are literally taking a child's gender. You are not affirming it. You are denying it. You are saying that it is something different, and you are not caring for that child. You are abusing that child by inculcating in them that their natural body has something wrong with it. Let's look at the Lurie Children's Hospital. That's the largest children's hospital in Chicago, which is got major direction and funding from the Pritzkers. And they provide materials and training to Illinois public schools so that those schools are best equipped to teach those students about gender theory and to covertly facilitate child sexual transitions. According to Christopher Rufo, quote, children are exposed to not only trans ideology, but to concepts such as kink, BDSM, which is the bondage thing, binders to flatten breasts, and prosthetic penises. These are minors. Lurie Children's Hospital, again, continuing from Rufo, gives presentations to teachers and administrators to, quote, communicate a non-binary understanding of gender to children, to, quote, disrupt the entrenched gender norms in Western society, to create a, quote, more gender creative world. So you see here, again, it is political. They're not even hiding it. That it's not just about an individual, student who feels differently from their gender and making that student feel more comfortable and giving them support. It's about, quote, disrupting the entrenched gender norms in Western society. There's a greater transformative political aspect to this. So that's just the state of Illinois. Let's go to my home state, the state which we're broadcasting in right now, California, and just do a cursory, believe me, it is cursory look at some of what is going on. So LA Unified School District here in Los Angeles is the school district which has about 450 schools in its jurisdiction. And they inaugurated in 2022-2023 school year what's called Rainbow Club meetings. So this is a affinity group for students who identify as LGBTQ. Well, they have students as young as 4 years old. 4 in those Rainbow Club groups. Because apparently kindergartners are old enough to identify as LGBTQ. You can't be bisexual when you're 4. You're pre-sexual when you're 4. It is evil. It is just beyond evil to confuse these students. There was a California bill that was passed by California Congress, but Governor Newsom vetoed it at the end of last year because many think that he's running a shadow campaign for the presidency of the United States, and he vetoed this because he knew it would be wildly unpopular and perhaps disqualifying for him. At least that's what I think happened, why he vetoed it, because he has sanctioned many other crazy gender laws. So this bill was, again, passed by Congress, vetoed by the governor, and it would have classified parents as abusive in custody battles if they did not affirm their child's gender. Now, this bill that thankfully was vetoed in the state of California is actually a similar bill, is a law in the state of Washington. In Washington state, they passed and the governor signed into law a bill which holds that when teenagers or children run away from their homes and go to a shelter, the state doesn't have to notify the parents if the reason why the child is running away is that their parents are not affirming their gender or going by the child's preferred pronouns. By the way, another exemption of when the state of Washington doesn't have to notify the parents if a child runs away is if they are seeking an abortion. So although in the state of California, the abusive custody battle bill was not signed into law, it appears that it is actually in real life happening. Let's listen to a testimony given by a California mother named Abigail Martinez of what happened to her child. And I have to warn you, it is one of the most disturbing videos I've ever seen in my life.
My name is Abigail Martinez. It has been 3 years and 164 days since I lost my daughter, Yaylee. I miss her every single day. Let me tell you how she died. My daughter was murdered by a gender ideology. CPS took my daughter when she was 16 years old. It was held by her public school counselor and LGBTQ group Rise and another trans-identified girl. My daughter was taken from her loving home because the state of California claimed I was abusive for not affirming her trans identity. I lost my daughter over a name and a pronouns. Even after I promised to call her a male name, it wasn't enough. My daughter was not a boy trapped in a girl's body. She had mental health issues. Against my consent, my daughter was given testosterone instead of therapy. The LGBTQ group used her to raise money for them. Look at the poor reject trans boy, they said. Why are there so many transgender in foster care? Because this state take them from their families, tell them to run, then steal them. Parents are given one option to treat their distressed child, affirm, drug, and remove their healthy body part, or else lose your child. The abuse claim against me was finally dropped, but it was too late. The damage was done. By then, my daughter was in a horrible mental and physical pain. My daughter knelt down in front of a train. She was murdered by gender ideology. I beg you, stop pushing gender ideology. I don't want any parent to feel what I feel every day. Affirmation is not good for the health, safety, and welfare of any child.
It's just so evil. It's so evil. Oh, I've never cried on this show. First time. And you know, the rot is just so deep because we have the Department of Justice, for instance, which is another truly Orwellian name, suing the state of Tennessee because Tennessee passed a law that prohibits gender-affirming care for minors. And the Department of Justice actually is suing the state of Tennessee by saying that they are discriminating against minors who need to have this surgery. Anyway, you understand the pain. It is beyond belief. And this story is becoming more and more common. Let me tell you about another mom from Maine. Thankfully, her child is still alive, was not killed by this evil ideology, but the damage is despicable. This mother's name is Amber Levine, and she is suing the Central Lincoln Country School System in Maine because her 13-year-old daughter wanted to transition to become a male. And this daughter was given male pronouns behind her mother's back and was given a breast binder. And there's actually a proposed law in Maine, Chapter 117 of Maine's Department of Education, which would require Maine school districts to keep gender transitions confidential from their parents. But again, just like Abigail Martinez, this is already happening, even if it's not codified into law. There's a push to codify it into law, but it is already happening. And what Amber Levine, this mother, said, gave a quote, which I think is so spot on, that these secret transitions are predatory sexual behavior. Quote, "This is the very definition of child predatory sexual grooming. Predators work to gain a victim's trust by driving a wedge between them and their parents." To give a few more examples, we've talked about schools, we've talked about laws. Let's talk about what's going on in prisons. In the state of New York, there's a law that has been passed by Congress, and it is going to the governor, pending the governor of New York's signature, called the Gender Identity, Respect, Dignity, and Safety Act. Again, a truly Orwellian name. And this would require the state of New York to place prisoners in facilities that correspond not with their biological gender, but how they identify. In fact, it would make it illegal to deny transfers for discriminatory reasons, they say, such as complaints of other incarcerated individuals who do not wish to be housed with a non-cisgender or intersex person. Okay, so what is this really about? What's really going on is that men, especially sexual predators, are now identifying as women to get into women's prisons, to sexually assault and rape women. We saw in the state of New Jersey that 2 female inmates got pregnant because a transgender individual came into their prisons. Let me just read to you quickly. Wisconsin Department of Corrections, according to their April 2022 records, they say that half of trans women, i.e. biological men, in the Department of Correction systems have been convicted of at least 1 count of sexual assault. To name an inmate, as an example, there's a man, Mark Campbell, who was put in prison in Wisconsin for 34 years for raping his own daughter, now identifies as Nicole Campbell. And a federal judge ruled in 2020 that Nicole Campbell has a right to taxpayer-funded transition surgery and can be transferred into a women's prison. There are so many more examples of what I could tell you. I edited it for the episode, and then in the episode, for the sake of time, I have to edit it. But I'll end with a textbook that is now being doled out to doctors, to people in medical school. It was published by the American Psychiatric Association. It's a $58 textbook called Gender Affirming Psychiatric Care. And they early on say that their approach is not an evidence-based approach, it's an evidence-informed approach. They say that scientific neutrality is a fallacy. So basically they're just like making up whatever they want to teach in this textbook. And they have chapters that include affirming, quote, two-spirit people, double queer people, and people who have mental disabilities such as autism, how to affirm their gender. And this textbook also says that gynecology as a term is bigoted. You can't call gynecology a woman's health service because that is apparently cis heteronormative. I'll end by repeating something I have said in this episode, but cannot be stated enough. This movement may have started as something compassionate and positive. But now, as we saw with that testimony, which truly haunts me, it has morphed into something that is nothing short of evil. Why is it so hard to have people wait until they're 18 years old to be able to decide for themselves? You have every right to decide if you want to be trans when you're 18. But let me ask this question. Why is it so important to these people to proselytize to children, to tell children as young as preschool about, non-conforming elements of gender, to have children be taken away from their parents? It is beyond sick. And at the risk of being too heavy-handed, I humbly encourage all of you to remember this when you go to vote in the 2024 election. This is one of the most defining issues of our time. Thank you so much for being with me. I welcome your thoughts. You can always email me at julie@julie-hartman.com. I'll see you soon. Take care.